So I know that your center has hosted a number of distinguished speakers this year, as Dr. Gray said, specifically addressing the issue of the large refugee and migrant populations that are moving through the African continent. And I know that those speakers and a number of you have paid particular attention to the severe challenges that refugees and other migrants face when they come to Morocco on their way to the Mediterranean, hoping to cross the Mediterranean to safety and a different life. And the death toll in that watery graveyard from 2014 to the start of this month has now risen to 4,863 men, women, and children. And overall, on a global level, there are now 65.5 million forcibly displaced people who have fled for their lives from their countries or who are displaced within their countries. This is the highest number of people who are in this desperate situation since the end of the Second World War. And behind the numbers here in this picture is just a partial satellite picture of the refugee camp I was just in. And these vast numbers of people are being driven from their homes at a time when we see a rising tide of hatred and extreme violence taking different forms throughout the world. And it is placing at risk the very idea of peaceful coexistence among peoples. And I stand here as a witness to that hatred and extreme violence. I've been on the border of Myanmar and Bangladesh. Two of Myanmar's largest neighbors are India to the west and China to the north and east, and it is also bordered by Thailand and Laos and Bangladesh. And these waters here are the Bay of Bengal and the Andaman Sea. Now, what we know today as Myanmar was previously called Burma. And that was under British colonial rule from 1885 to 1948. And it was called Burma because the largest ethnic group are called the Burmans. The Burmans. And after independence, as a rejection of its colonial past, the country's military government returned to the original Burman name for the country, which was Myanmar. Now, regardless of the name change, the largest proportion of the people in the country come from the ethnic group known as the Burmans. And the remaining 32% of the population comprises 135 different ethnic groups. And those are only the ones that are officially recognized by the government. There are also ethnic groups which are not officially recognized by the government. And those groups which are not acknowledged by the government include the Rohingya. But the Rohingya are not alone. This is a country with a lot of ethnic conflict. This is not a country at peace. There are many small armed groups in the country. They each have a flag, they have fighters, and they are holding out for independence and autonomy. And there may be anywhere from 25 to 49 of these armed groups. The numbers are constantly shifting, and that includes groups that have signed a ceasefire but have not disbanded their fighters. And even after 51 years of independence, no government in the country has been able to reach a comprehensive peace settlement. Now, you may be hoping that I'll be able to give you a comprehensive and satisfactory explanation for the events that I'm going to describe. There are many competing narratives about this country, and none fits all the available evidence. Some say that what I'm going to describe is a story of conflict born out of extreme poverty. Some say that this is a story of a conspiracy to exploit the country's oil and natural gas deposits. And others say that this is part of the defense of the traditional Burman and Buddhist religion, race, and nationality in the country. Now, all of those are factors in what has happened to the Rohingya. They live close to the coast and near the border with Bangladesh. It is rich in oil and gas deposits, but it is also one of the poorest areas of the country. And under successive military governments, and still today, the Rohingya have faced decades of discrimination. They've been forced into conditions which are almost identical to the apartheid system that you may be familiar with, to which blacks were subjected for so many years in South Africa. They have even been stripped of citizenship, despite the fact they've lived in the country for many, many generations. And indeed, at many times, the Rohingya have left the country in large numbers, crossed the border, gone back again. But nothing prepared the world for what it began to see in August of last year. They began escaping across the border to Bangladesh. Drone footage showed these incredible long lines of tens of thousands of people. It rapidly became a huge humanitarian emergency. And what was driving them out? Their villages were being burnt to the ground. Satellite images showed those villages before and then after they had been nearly completely obliterated. They struggled, fleeing for their lives, with nothing. No one was prepared for this. Suddenly, hundreds of thousands of people were flooding in, and the scale of this makeshift camp is virtually unimaginable.
Floods killed my husband. I arrived here yesterday night. I have 2 sons, but while we were crossing the border, I lost the younger one. I don't know where. When the military started to kill the people in our village, we ran, but we didn't know there were going to be mines on the way. I was right behind my husband when it blew up. All I could think of was how I would cope with our 4 children now. I have nobody left in this world, and I don't know what to do. The one I loved is gone.
This is the camp where I was 2 weeks ago, meeting these people and recording evidence of what happened to them. This was particularly unbearable for me as a Buddhist. These people were fleeing from a majority Buddhist country. You heard the mother with her little son say that monks had killed her husband. And the desperate people we talked to said they were fleeing what they called the Buddhist terror. Nothing could be further from the Buddha's teachings than this. Nothing. That's partly why it's so important for me to tell you this, but also for everyone, whatever faith you are or of no faith, because this is actually an assault on our common humanity, and it is crucial to wake up the conscience of the world about this. It's also important for so many of you to know this, because what is happening here is taking place against the backdrop of global Islamophobia. The monks and the military who are responsible for this humanitarian catastrophe say what they're doing is defending their race and their religion. If I start to tell you what happened, it will break your heart, said one of the Rohingya women to a United Nations investigator. Now, when I was there, I interviewed a doctor who was one of the first responders when the Rohingya began struggling through the mud, as you saw, from Myanmar to Bangladesh. And that doctor asked me not to identify him. So I'm using here a previously published photograph of another doctor, but I'm also going to tell you what he said. The first doctor I met said there were bullet wounds, shrapnel and landmine injuries, limbs chopped off with machetes. There were people bleeding to death as they walked, kept alive only by their will to live. There were children whose entire families had been killed. They had simply panicked and fled with everyone else who was escaping. There were hundreds and hundreds of women, he said, injured and traumatized by sexual assault. The little girl in this picture had her knee severely injured and required emergency treatment once she crossed the border. And her family told this doctor that she had been deliberately shot in the lower body by police as she and her family were trying to struggle across the border. Now, the scale of this catastrophe is hard to imagine. No one in the camp knows exactly how many people are there. Probably up to 1 million, and more people arrive every day. It is the largest refugee complex in the world today. It is double the size of the next nearest refugee camp in size, which is in Uganda. Now, 6 months ago, the United Nations said there were 14,000 children in the camp who had lost one or both of their parents. A month later, the Bangladesh government said that number had risen to more than 36,000. By the beginning of this year, UNESCO, the United Nations Children's Agency, said there were more than 250,000 Rohingya children living in the overcrowded camps and informal settlements on the Bangladesh border. It is now estimated that 60% of that quarter of 1 million children have lost their mother, their father, or both. And that is 150,000 children. What are they carrying with them? Well, their drawings tell the story. They have, their villages were set on fire. Their people were shot in cold blood. There were helicopter gunships. There were people strung up in the trees. And there were babies thrown into the flames. Now, as you can tell, this is very difficult for me. And I bet it's difficult for all of us. And this is why I appreciate so much that you're here, because in a certain way, the fact that we're all here with all of our beating hearts, in a way makes it easier for each of us. Now, I want you to know that I am going to be coming to what we can do about this and what we can do to help the huge numbers of people in these camps. But if you don't mind, I would like to have us take a Pomodoro pause. This is a lot to take in, so however you want to do this, I would just like to stand here, just be silent for a minute, and not so much think about what I've seen, but connect with my feelings. My heart is pounding. Perhaps yours is too. And what I know from my experience in the world of mindfulness is if we actually connect with the distress that we're feeling, we actually can work with that in a more healthy way and keep our minds open to what's going on. So I just invite you, it's a little experiment, just try that, let's be here together for 1 minute and just feel how actually this feels. I'm really here trying not only to present the difficult information here, but help you get a grasp of what's going on. There are 3 things I want to go over with you, if you don't mind. I want to go over, in particular, the situation of women, which is a very, very important issue here. Some of the controversy surrounding this, so you understand what the sort of public debate is, and also the question of genocide. But before I go further, I'm going to pause. If anyone needs to leave for any reason, this is a moment you can do that. And also, if there's a question, you have a burning question right at the moment, you want to stop talking and let me ask my question. I'm going to take a pause right here and see if there's any burning question anyone has. And maybe I'll answer right now, or I'll be able to assure you that I'm going to answer it. Yes, please.
Hey, we're Amnesty International, so we
Okay,
have
do we have a microphone? We're going to take a microphone up to you so we can hear you.
Not really loud. Stand up and talk loud. So I
Could you try to take a microphone?
Yeah. So we're Amnesty International, and we have petitions for the case of Rohingya here. And guys, please sign it so that we could help the people that Dr. Richard just talked about.
Okay, thank you very much. And so at the end, when people are leaving, they can do that?
Yeah,
Thank you very
absolutely.
much.
Yeah,
Thank
if you would love to.
Okay, any other questions or anything anyone wants to say just at this point? We're having a little pause. Okay, then I'll... Yes, please. Just if you don't mind doing your exercise and taking the mic up.
Good for me.
My question is about U.S. relations with Myanmar.
Which relations?
U.S. relations with Myanmar.
Between the United States
yeah.
and Myanmar? Yeah.
Yeah, and if they've been affected,
Yes.
to what degree?
Okay. I'll give a short answer to that, and later when we come to discussing the question of genocide, if that's of interest to people, I can say more. The United States... thank you. The United States has been historically a very strong economic and military supporter of successive governments in Myanmar. It did lead a very strong campaign of sanctions a number of years ago, part of which is credited with the change of government to the current government. And now that this has started, the U.S. administration has played a very strong role in criticizing the Myanmar military, in suspending any further arms assistance, and there is legislation currently going through the U.S. Congress and Senate on this issue. And I think that the point here is that a lot more like that will be needed if there's to be a significant change, and we could talk more about it. Excellent question. Any other question before I continue? Yes, over there. Can you just pass the microphone along to that?
In your talk right now, you talked about monks killing husbands and children, and also police. I'm just curious about the relationship between the Buddhists and police and the military organization in.
Well, Myanmar is one of the 8 countries in the world where the majority of the population are Buddhist. So you'll be familiar with the notion, sometimes people say people are born into a religion, so they're like culturally part of that religion. But nonetheless, they would, if you ask them, and when there's a census taken about nationality and religion, the majority of the population, which tends to be the Burman part of the population, describe themselves as Buddhists. So as in a majority Christian or a Muslim or a Jewish country, the majority of the military, the majority of the police and security forces are people who would describe themselves as Buddhists. And as I will show you in this next section, formal monks who are like the preachers of the Buddhist world have fanned, I'm very sorry to say, the flames of hatred that have led to this. Okay. Perhaps I'll go on. Is that okay? So, I'd like to share with you something about the situation of women in the camps, and it is difficult for the women who are in these camps I think partly, I'm not absolutely sure of this, but partly for cultural reasons, perhaps other reasons, to discuss their situation very openly. And so in the delegation I was with, there were a number of women who included skilled professionals who are familiar with dealing with extreme psychological and physical trauma. And they were able to have closed private sessions with the women who are suffering from extreme injuries and trauma in the camps. And that team also visited people who are in extreme situations as far as their health is concerned. And although I said that many of the women prefer not to discuss openly what has happened to them, some women have definitely decided to speak out. And so there was an example here of a woman who very generously, I feel, came to speak to our delegation, both men and women, about her situation. When the army attacked this woman's village, she was forced into a house with other women. And the troops then set fire to the house and burnt all of them to death except this one woman. And you can see it's not so obvious, but perhaps you can begin to see there'd be outlines of the scarring on the side of her face, and she's deeply traumatized. Now, I was contacted by this woman, Sabina Yasmin, who is one of Bangladesh. She is the only female photojournalist in Bangladesh who has consistently followed the story of the Rohingya. And I was extremely touched. She contacted me. She knew that our delegation was there. And she said, I'd like to offer my photographs to you if you can use them in any way. So I'm going to use a number of her pictures here. I want to be absolutely clear. These pictures are not necessarily the pictures of women who've suffered the extreme abuse, but it is highly likely that, as with almost all the people in the camps, they are witnesses to it. So, first a few statistics. More than half of the people who are affected by this crisis are women and girls. And the human rights organization Human Rights Watch says that 80% of all the most recent arrivals in the camps are exclusively women and children. Mothers with newborn children have arrived without any fresh clothing, and pregnant women are malnourished, often after walking for days without food. United Nations workers have helped deliver 1,827 babies in the camps in the last 6 months, and have provided after-birth care, antenatal care for more than 51,000 Rohingya women. The United Nations organization, which is dedicated to the empowerment of women, which is called UN Women, says that almost every woman or girl who has fled here is either a survivor of or a witness to multiple incidents of sexual assault, rape, or gang rape. They have witnessed murder through mutilation or burning alive of a close family member or neighbor. Now this is a remarkably heroic woman. She is Ms. Yang Hee Lee. She's the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in Myanmar. Her most recent report was in March, that's last month, and her report is written in the formal language of the United Nations. And I would like to share 2 sentences with you from her report. The Special Rapporteur notes credible allegations of widespread sexual violence committed by the Tatmadaw, the Myanmar army, and other security forces against women and girls, including gang rape involving multiple perpetrators. The Special Rapporteur listened to personal accounts from survivors and family witnesses describing women and girls killed after being raped, including burned alive in their homes, unable to escape while they were unconscious or bound. Now, you may remember I said that there is a lot of controversy about this. Now, Ms. Yang Hee Lee, who we just saw there, has been, although she represents the United Nations, has been banned from re-entering Myanmar. And before that, she faced hostile demonstrations in the streets, and Buddhist monks abused her using the most extreme language. And journalists inside Myanmar are facing harassment, even death threats, for independent reporting. 2 reporters from Reuters news agency, one of the main international news agencies, are now on trial for violating the country's Official Secrets Act because they were investigating a mass grave site. And in September last year, as the Rohingya were filmed crossing the border, the State Councillor of Myanmar, Aung San Suu Kyi, told President Erdogan of Turkey that a huge iceberg of misinformation had been created. The very next day, as journalists were inspecting the ruins of a village called Alel Tan Kwa, a local police officer told them the Rohingya burned their own homes and ran away. The Myanmar military, because of the international outcry, conducted its own investigation and reported that according to 2,817 people interviewed from 54 Rohingya villages, soldiers did not fire on innocent villagers, rape, or commit sexual violence against women. And in February this year, a member of the parliament and a former general, U Tinai, said the government was not doing enough to tell the world that there is no such race as the Rohingya in Myanmar. Now, as I mentioned before, a startling feature of this tragedy has been the inflammatory speeches by Buddhists, including Buddhist monks. Now, as in so many other conflicts, they're a small minority, but they're a vociferous minority and they have a huge impact. They have branded supporters of the Rohingya people as our enemies. So if you feel that you are here because you're a supporter of the Rohingya enemy, these monks are telling you you are their enemies. They have tried to disrupt international aid shipments to the Rohingya, and they have called the United Nations Refugee Agency a terrorist supporter group. Now, this catastrophe has not come out of nowhere. The Rohingya people not only include Muslims, but also Hindus. I met a Hindu priest in the camps. They include Christians. There is a particularly strong strand of Baptists among the Rohingya. And there are also quite possibly people who do not belong to any organized religion among them. And they have lived in Myanmar for generations, as I said earlier. But the repression, which is like apartheid, means they have been denied access to equal health care, to equal education, to equal employment, to religious worship, to equality of travel, to equality of family rights, and they have, as I said, been stripped of their citizenship. Now, a resistance group calling itself the Rohingya Salvation Army emerged. And last August, they attacked 30 government, police, and military posts. And in response, the government said that it needed to wipe out the threat of terrorism. And the day that they announced that, the government announced cleansing operations. Now, on this trip, I learned from a very highly placed, credible source that in fact 3 weeks before that announcement, Myanmar had already moved its military attack forces into place. And that is very much supported by the fact that within 2 weeks of launching these apparently spontaneous cleansing operations, nearly 40% of all Rohingya villages had been targeted by the army. Now, satellite footage so this is the village of Mien Hlut on December 16, 2017. This is the satellite photography taken of that village on February 13, 2018. Look at what is happening. It's gone. And it didn't just stop in that initial wave. This is another village, Gwason village. This satellite picture was taken on January 7, 2018. 8 weeks later, February 16, 2018. This village has not only been burnt to the ground, they have brought in bulldozers and bulldozed it over. So this is what, in fact, has been happening to a staggering number of the Rohingyas' villages. Their existence is being obliterated. And that brings me to the question of genocide. Now, this wonderful person is Beth Lalich. She is a genocide historian and a specialist, therefore, in the study of genocide. And she was a member of our delegation. She plays an important role in public education in one of the major genocide memorials and centers in the United States. And her expert opinion was that what the Rohingya are undergoing is a textbook case of genocide, where an indigenous community living in their own ancestral land is being systematically annihilated by the military, political, and religious establishment of Myanmar. Now, if anyone here is interested in this particularly complex legal aspect of the question of genocide and what can be done about that. I'll be happy to come to that when we have our questions at the end. And at this point, I have presented to you what I feel are the essentials that you need to know in order to be reasonably well informed about, I want to say, this living hell that I've just come back from. And I do want to invite a discussion where we can talk about what we can do and that kind of thing. But I certainly need Pomodoro pause. And I invite you to join me in that so we can just feel exactly how we feel. And that will also help, I think, make our discussion about what we can do. I have some suggestions on that. And your questions all the more meaningful if we do that. So may I invite you in the spirit of a different way of working to just take a pause with me and just to, you know, this kind of stuff does a lot of things to our nervous system. And instead of trying to pretend that that is not the case or try and push through it, actually the most powerful thing we can do is feel it. And the natural intelligence of our bodies and minds will support us. What we can do. And I'm sure you'll have your own suggestions, and of course our Amnesty International friends are here with their very practical suggestion. So we asked the people in the camps. We also asked the officials, the international officials, as well as the government of Bangladesh, what can we do? And there were really two things. The first thing that they said was most important was to spread the word. That's why I said at the beginning, take pictures, use social media. If you want to, get together or talk about how this can be done, it's really important. Word of mouth, sharing links, telling your families and friends. This is not just something for AUI. AUI is a launch pad for something here. And also it's very important to get the word out to family or friends or people who are living abroad around the world. But then they can also tell other people. This is how every great change in the world has occurred, by people starting to tell each other and talk about this. And so you please talk about what's happening. Go online to find out more. You can share any of the images from our time here. And thanks to the university, we'll have a film of this which will be available very soon. And why is this vital? It's because, first of all, the people we spoke to in the camps want their stories told. They want us to know. And the other thing was very important to remember is that the people who did this want these people to be forgotten. So every time you share a story or remember this, you're fulfilling the wishes of the Rohingya, and you're defying the people who think they can get away with this. The second thing that we can do is to help meet their basic needs. Now, these people fled their burning villages and the massacres with almost nothing. If they are carrying anything, it was their children, or their elderly, or the wounded. They need food, clean water, and clothing. What you may not realize, they fled across a border into essentially uninhabited countryside in these rapidly growing gigantic numbers. There was nothing there. So you just pause for a second and contemplate your own bodily needs and functions, and imagine that you have moved in numbers that are far staggering than we have in this room into a situation where there is nothing. They need urgent medical care, and they need urgent medical care, and they need durable shelters. So currently, most of what they're sheltering under are like bamboo sticks covered over with sheets of plastic. And the monsoons are coming, and when the monsoon's coming, those little makeshift dwellings will just be flattened in the power of the monsoon rains. And the earth that they're currently living on, they have no flooring, it's all just in the open, will be turned into a vast sea of mud. The most recent assessment is that $1 billion needs to be raised between now and June, both from governments and from people like us around the world, to meet these basic needs. Now at the end, I'm going to give you a sheet which has logos and organizations for 6 of the most respected organizations, both Bangladeshi and international, that are there working in the camps. And if you or your families or people you know want to go online and see what you think, I can tell you, I've seen these organizations at work. They're doing amazing work. So having outlined those 2 points, spread the word and help meet their basic needs, I'm now got to the point where I'm going to stop and say if there was anything you want to ask about or anything you want to say about what you feel we can do to help, I'm here, I'm open for any discussion and any question, and I just want to say very personally, you have no idea what it means to me that you're here. I don't know if anybody else giving a lecture thank people like this, but you know, you can't. None of us can handle this stuff on our own. You have to do it with other people. So it means a huge amount to me to be able to share this and feel that it's tough for both of us. So please, if you have questions or thoughts you want to share, and if you touch on a big subject like the genocide or something like that, I have some more detailed information I can share with you. So let's pause here, and I realize maybe some people may need to slip away because time's getting on, so please feel free to do it. I won't take it personally. And I think we're going to pass the microphone around.
Can you sort of self-circulate the microphone just because it's crowded? Thank you.
Hi, first of all, I would like to thank you for this wonderful presentation. And thank you for giving us your time to actually show us what's actually going on there. My question is about, if you don't mind, your religion. I know Dr. Doris Gray said that you were born and you were raised as a Buddhist. And so when you went there, this is all going on in this country, and people are blaming Buddhists for it. And as we heard the woman saying that monks killed her husband. So did you talk openly to people there and explain that you were a Buddhist, or did you have to hide it?
Yes, I had. Actually, I was terrified of going. And I was terrified of going, not because I thought I'd get beaten up by these people, you know, but I didn't know whether I'd be able to handle it. You can see I'm not doing too well today. And I knew there was something that perhaps in a way I can't say uniquely placed and able to do, but certainly could try doing, which was that probably if I had been born in Asia, or was a conventional Buddhist monk, I don't know how well that would have gone down in the camps. But I'm an old white man, and so when we were having these very intimate meetings with these people, I knew what I had to do, and I would let all my other very distinguished colleagues, former ambassadors, ask all the detailed questions. And I'd say, to them, there is something I would like to say to you. I'm a Buddhist. And I would like you to know that not only I, but Buddhists all over the world are horrified by what has been done to you. And filled with deep sorrow. With what you are going through now. And I managed to look in the groups that we were with, each person in the eye. And then afterwards I would go up and because many of them are from the Muslim tradition, I would say, Assalamu alaikum. And even at a certain point, I became rather like a badly behaved member of our delegation because I felt, I need to spend time with these people, and I would be outside, in the dirt, with these old men and naked children and women, and shaking their hands, and it was a very, very potent moment for me because everybody was silent. There was some kind of reaching out to each other across some immense sort of boundaries and human suffering. And that's probably one of the best things ever in my life. And I don't think I'm wrong in saying that I bet all of you know what I'm talking about, because this is happening in all kinds of ways, in all kinds of communities, in all kinds of religions, all over the world at this moment. This is a very, very powerful local story, but there is a catastrophic phenomenon going across the world at the moment, dividing people up and having people subjected to the most appalling suffering just because they happen to be either another race or another faith or speak a different language. We are not going to get forward as humanity on that basis. So it was that tough question, but thank you.
Thank you for the speech. My question is this: you somewhat stated skeptically that this could be a conspiracy theory and whatnot, but Saudi Arabia, China, and United Arab Emirates has created multiple pipelines and oil extracting pipelines within these recent bulldozed areas. So my question to you is, do you think it's plausible that if Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, China, and all other countries involved were removed, that this could lessen the issue at hand?
Just check. Removed in what way?
To end their oil extraction pipeline.
Well, I think. Well, first of all, when I said it is a conspiracy, I mean, there is quite a you're speaking on behalf of quite a body of research and political thinking, which believes that this issue lies at the heart of what's going on here. Let me just say that it doesn't quite explain the incredibly long period of time prior to the current interest in the natural gas and oil deposits, during which the Rohingya people have been subjected to this apartheid, which did not lead to, clearing the areas for oil exploration or whatever. It seemed to be purely punitive measures against a relatively small part of the population. Nonetheless, I would say that every political observer and people who follow bodies like the Security Council at the United Nations know that there is at least one permanent member of the Security Council which at this moment will block any moves by the Security Council to deal with the issue in this country. And that country is China. The capital of the province where the Rohingya live is called Sittwe. And on the Chinese plan for the One Belt, One Road initiative, Sittwe is marked, and with the agreement of the Myanmar government, to be the Chinese port on the Bay of Bengal through which this trade, shipping, and oil and natural gas exploration flows. So I want to say to you, we absolutely cannot rule that out as a factor. There's no question about that. But I just wanted to point out it. Sometimes people pick one part of the puzzle and say it explains the whole. And in what I've been looking at, it's part of the complexity of the puzzle, not the explanation of the whole. But what you're pointing to also is that in a number of these situations, and we could think of a whole bunch of them in the world today, it's not sufficient just to see it in isolation as a problem within that country. There are other geographical interests and financial interests involved in virtually all of this. So that's very helpful. Does that go to your question?
Hey.
Yes.
So before anything, I would love to thank you. You have no idea how your presence today is important to us. You are defending people from another ethnicity. And thank you very much, because you are our glimmer of hope that we can coexist one day. So my question is, why the media is not talking enough about this problem? Why we don't see Rohingyas, Myanmar in this problem? Why there is no media talking and voicing the problems of those people?
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, I'm conscious that I'm standing in front of a person who spent their life working as a working journalist and a very distinguished international journalist. So I'm going to be open to correction on what I say here. But there is a certain quality in my extremely long lifetime. I would say I've noticed two shifts in some styles of news reporting. First of all, in what could be called the old days, there were often journalists who were sent on assignment to a country for a very long period of time, became very, very familiar with the situation in the country, and there was time allocated, say in the broadcast media and particularly in print media, for longer, more in-depth analytical pieces about trends and situations in the country. So this would be a classic one where someone would say, what has happened over the last 6 months, what is going over, or what's going on, what is the prognosis? I would say, generally speaking, in my observation of the media I look at, there is less and less space allocated for that in comparison to what I'm familiar with from the old times. And part of the evidence of that is that the number of what were then called foreign correspondents who were embedded in countries has, perhaps for financial or other reason, been significantly cut back. So often you have people who are flown in to cover an event and fly out afterwards. Now, that reinforces the second aspect, which is not necessarily the fault of the news media, but I think it has to do with what we are now calling the attention economy. And probably you know that this phrase has to do also with the effect of new technology on all of us, which is that we seem to be becoming increasingly less capable of sticking with something for more than very, very short periods of time. Like, I'm very appreciative you're all still here. I was thinking, this could be far too long, that sort of thing, right? And it means that in a way news, the meaning of news has become even more time precise, which is like what's happening right now. So like, you're very interested in what, and I'm so pleased you're here, but I'm telling you what I saw 2 weeks ago, and there aren't very many news reports about what was going on 2 weeks ago. To put together that little film at the beginning, I was basically going back to journalistic pictures when the whole thing was breaking news. It was something that was taking the world by surprise. It had that riveting power of now. I think it'd be reasonable to say that in most editorial boards, if someone said, I'd like to go and cover the Rohingya, that the answer would be, well, what's changed? And if nothing has changed, then there's nothing by definition new. So the problem we have here, and I want to say that I met senior officials of the Bangladesh government. How does that relate to this whole thing? They know that what is impolitely called the media circus has moved off. Just as you said, it's not news. So then where is the public pressure or the interest in this that is going to motivate governments to pledge the huge sums of money that are needed to sustain these people? And the Bangladesh government has been saying their greatest fear is that although they were told when the media was there that money would be no object, that when they go to the next huge conference where governments pledge funds to see if they can get to that billion, most elected representatives and government officials will feel under no pressure from their home constituencies or media to fulfill that promise of money being no object. And, you know, if you've noticed this pattern, we see it, it's not just about these situations, it can be about earthquakes, it can be about natural disasters. Everybody gets incredibly excited, which is good, but 2 or 3 days later, you know, once the last little babies have been pulled out alive from the rubble itself is no longer interesting. The homeless people are no longer interested. And then you have places all over the world which are just left as they were. And this is why the Rohingya, and why that journalist came to me and gave me her pictures. Take these pictures out and show them. Because it's by people caring about this and knowing about this, it's the way we have to be the media now. And we have to use social media, I guess, for that. And luckily we've got it. So please use it. Does that help to answer your question? Was that a travesty of the history of journalism over the last few decades? Did you want to say anything about it, add to it, improve on it?
I mean, part of it is, of course, that journalism is a business. And you need to sell your stories. And only certain types of stories sell. I remember when the famine happened in Somalia, my news agency wrote 258 stories. before it was picked up the first time by newspapers. 258. Because at that time, only hundreds of people were dying. And they were saying, we'll write about it when you have 1 million people dying. Before that, it isn't news. So you can't just blame the journalists. It's a media. Media is a business. It's an industry. You have to sell your stories, and they depend on what consumers want. And consumers don't want a small tragedy. They want a gigantic tragedy before they are moved to do anything. So 1 human life is not worth it. It has to be 10,000 before we want to talk about it. And that is a problem.
Okay, just let me check how, I don't want to keep, I always like to respect people's rights to leave. Okay, 10, 15 minutes, but also I just want to let you know if someone has to go for some reason, it's totally okay with me, I understand. Yes, other questions or comments, please. There you are.
Thank you for your presentation.
Uh-huh.
I think that there is a big question mark on the global responsibility regarding Rohingya's issue. With this grave injustice, persecution, and ethnic cleansing. Because after what happened in Sudan, Syria, Rwanda, and a lot of countries, and I would like to go back to your question of what we can do. I think what we can do, we should reconsider the definition of national self-determination, because the sovereignty tool allows those people to commit crimes, ethnic cleansing in the name of state. So I think this is the big problem facing this Rohingya issue, is the self-determination. Thank you.
No. I mean, it is. I mean, it's just. It's also an interesting point, which is that I was speaking to someone just the other day, and they said that really there was a. You can't quite cast your mind back to the end of the Second World War. I realize that, but take it from me, I can't quite either, believe it or not. But the horrors of that war were so immense that it delivered a certain shock to governments and people, which is like we've got to get out of a situation which essentially was rooted in what you're describing, about nation states and all that sort of thing. And I think it's fair to say that there was a period where there were institutions were put in place to attempt to prevent this kind of thing, and there was some kind of spirit. Some people question this, but I think there was some kind of spirit of working together, coexistence, and that kind of thing, even though there was an awful lot of tension. But it seems that is breaking down, even that sort of veneer of peace, if you call it that. And interestingly enough, in the structure of the United Nations, these large powers that were supposed to protect peace in the world are actually at the moment the powers that are gearing up against each other. So this also opens the door to a tremendous amount of instability, and definitely there are people who say, well, look, what's the root problem here? It's people identifying with a subset of humanity, whether it's their race, their nation, or whatever, rather than taking a view of being part of the whole of humanity. And if you take that thought further, you start to look at the environmental crisis. And as a species, we've tended to put our species first. And countless other species, as you know, are being destroyed. And we've been brought to the brink of the devastation of our home in space. So I think, that in addition to thinking, like you were saying about national determination and how individual peoples are protected, I think it's going to be very, very difficult for individual peoples like the Rohingya to feel safe and protected without actually some kind of, whether it's going to take shock therapy or what, the world waking up as a whole to saying, look, we have to put some kind of system and values in place that are going to transcend all our ancient divisions so that we can help all of us and have solidarity. That goes back to your question of how do we get solidarity for these people? The people don't care about them and don't see them as important to them as their own families. These people are going to be left in this camp. So I don't know whether that's addressing your question, but it's definitely what is brought up in my mind, and why also in a way I'm happy to share this with you, because I feel, yes, this is about the Rohingya, but it's a terrible and damning example of what seems to be going so disastrously wrong in this world and the way we look at our common humanity. That's a personal take.
Hello?
Yes, this gentleman.
I'm sorry.
Oh, yes, it's okay, and then the microphone will come down to you.
Okay.
Yes, hello.
Hi. I just want to thank you. Actually, I don't have any questions. I just want to thank you for allowing yourself to be emotional, and you have no idea how powerful and touching and relatable your feeling as a Buddhist, and your sorrow for those people, whether Muslims, Christians, or non-religious, is extremely touching, and I really, really, really appreciate your talk and your values as a human being, regardless of any other religion, and I really hope we can do something. And just thank you.
Thank you. Yes, this. No, it's okay, because they all want to hear what you have to say, brother.
There we
okay,
go.
all right.
In your opinion, how do you think we solve the statelessness that the Rohingya are going to be facing due to their not being recognized by Myanmar, and now as a sort of refugee and in a transitional state?
Right. Well, I think I'm sad to say this, but first of all, I think none of this is going to be solved quickly. I believe that I was told today that the Myanmar government had announced they had taken back one family. I personally do not think that you destroy people's villages and then send in the bulldozers with the intention that those people are coming back. When we asked the refugees about this, which maybe is the most important point, they basically came down to 3 points. The first was that their safety has to be guaranteed. So it's not that they speak with one unified voice, but they support a proposal from the Bangladesh government, which it has made to the General Assembly of the United Nations, that actually there be safe zones created within Myanmar which would be subject to UN protection. That would require the government and the military of Myanmar to allow international military supervision of parts of their territory in order to enable people that they have just driven out to come back and live there. Okay? Second consideration is that they want their citizenship back. Well, if you follow this whole issue very, very closely, there has been a progressive and systematic deprival of their citizenship, like family by family, military and other people coming to families, getting them to sign documents that say, which effectively renounce their identity as members of the community. This would require a complete change in successive government policy in Myanmar, stretching back over decades. And these people, I think you can understand why, say, well, they wouldn't feel safe, and they perhaps wouldn't want to be citizens of the country unless there was justice for the forces and the people who committed these atrocities. Now, you saw the results of the Myanmar military's own investigation, in which they said that none of this had happened. So this opens up the question of what is called universal jurisdiction. That brings us to the question of genocide. It brings us to the question of the International Criminal Court. It brings us to the question of the security, with at least one permanent member of the Security Council likely to use its veto in support of Myanmar against any action. And so, although it is technically possible, and I know that the evidence is being collected for this, there could be a special international court established for the trying of war crimes against the military and possibly civilian leadership of Myanmar. You may have noticed those take years. And it's not because they're ineffective, it's because it's actually about establishing who was responsible, what they did, holding to a high standard of evidence, and then passing justice. You take all those three things together, and then you ask, what can we do? Well, I would say at this point that the only thing that's going to shift that dynamic is actually by an awful lot of people around the world refusing to let these people be forgotten. Because it is going to require such a level of sort of like it doesn't have to be political agitation, but it's human agitation like this, that it becomes politically impossible for governments to fall silent on this matter. And I realize I'm asking for a lot there. But you know, I want to tell you something that might seem really, really strange to you, and it might seem incredibly egotistical on my part to say this. There's a film about the monk in Myanmar who probably has the most to do with stirring all this up. And I watched that film and I thought, if one guy can do that, watch what this guy can do. You know, and I know, I hope it doesn't sound like a cartoon to you, but it's like, well, wait a minute. This catastrophe originated in the mind of a small number of people. All the other catastrophes, I don't have to mention them here, they began in the minds of a basically small number of people who started convincing other people to do the most unspeakable things to others. So, whatever there's 200 of here, that's probably more than these other people started off with. So, if we turn our minds to creating change, it's possible. And like you said, I worked all my life in Amnesty International, and people thought it was a joke when it was created. It was not a joke. Right? So, I wanted to say that to you too also, because it's very important not to get dispirited by this. That's very, very important. I wondered if someone would get up and say, has this caused you to lose faith in humanity? And actually it has not. Because when you see how these people, the Rohingya people, carry their own people, care for their own people, through this incredible adversity that has befallen them. Actually, it's incredibly humbling. And then when you see all these people who have flown in from all over the world without being asked, you know, there may be large international organizations, but they're ultimately made up of people. And they've given up whatever they had, and they're living there, and they're working in these camps. The smell in these camps is horrible. And they're going in there day after day after day. helping these people who have nothing. And when you see people like that lady, Yang Hee Lee, you know, she's amazing. You know, she's like a force of nature, going in there, facing up to the generals, facing up to the hostility, facing demonstrations in the streets, doing her job and speaking out. Well then, you know, and maybe at the end I'll show you one or two pictures just of some of the Rohingya women. The strength in their faces as they help their families. Maybe I just want to show you this because I mentioned like how they carry their people. And you might say, well, that's what human beings do. That's right. That is what human beings do. And they're doing that, huh? Look at them. And you have to realize, they might have been going for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe 12 days. Like this, possibly without water. And look at this amazing woman with her baby and her children. And you see the intensity in her face. And you see her determination to care for her people. Doesn't make me lose faith in humanity. So that's perhaps a long answer to your question, but that's what's in my heart. Maybe we can take one more question and I'll stop, or were you basically stretching and just wishing, oh God, I get out of here? Anyone else? No, please.
Maybe that could be the last one.
Yeah, last question.
Yeah,
and
thank you.
I can give a short answer too, by the way.
I was hoping you could talk more about Aung San Suu Kyi a little bit. I know
Yes.
she's a former Nobel Prize winner,
Yes.
but it's since been stripped from her for obvious reasons. I was wondering if you could talk about how her government has, allowed this to happen, or what exactly caused this reversal, basically.
Well, in all humility, I have to say, I really don't know. There are multiple conflicting accounts. How people tell you authoritatively, this is what Aung San Suu Kyi thinks, this is what she said, this is how she got there. I don't know, actually, this statement, I don't know. I want to just tell you about a little exchange. I'm not trying to avoid this. That is the real answer. But it has some resonance which is more than just not knowing. When, with one of the groups that we were meeting, I explained, as I explained to you about, being a Buddhist and that sort of thing. And I said, I have a question for you, I said to them. What do you think went through the minds of the people who decided to do this to you and did it to you? And it was a lovely old imam who was right in front of me. He looked at me and he said, we have lived in peace with these people for generations. We have no idea what got into their minds. And I think that there's an element of you could say like profound mystery in these sorts of situations. Because there was a level of frenzy here. The rate at which these villages were being destroyed, babies being thrown into the flames, It reminded me of the genocide in Rwanda, where the rate of killing was so intense that it was deemed mathematically impossible for human beings to wield machetes at that speed. And maybe I'd leave you with a thing for you to ponder, which I ponder a lot. Which is not just what can we do, what can I do? And the I do question here is, if I was a soldier in that army, and I was ordered to do this, and all my comrades were like my blood brothers in the army, and I had had it drilled into me that these people were not even human beings. They were cockroaches who were destroying my country. When the order came to kill, how clear would my own mind be about my deepest values? And I would adhere to that rather than give them up, as countless people have done throughout history. And that the hysteria of that bloodlust takes hold and root. And strangely enough, I believe that part of the mission of this university is to help you become the sort of people who in that situation would refuse to follow orders. To me, that's the sign of a really great education. And I think the fact that you're here and interested in sitting through really this dreadful information is evidence that you know what I mean when I say that. So there's a real personal element of learning here, which is when that madness sweeps over a country or a population, will we be the people who will, it doesn't matter what you do to me, I'm not doing that. And I think that's a question that, I have in my mind about Aung San Suu Kyi. As the old Imam said to me, I know, but God only knows. So, thank you.